The desert sun beat down mercilessly on forward operating base Whiskey, its rays creating shimmering waves of heat that distorted the horizon. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she watched the transport vehicle approach through a cloud of dust. Another batch of fresh recruits was arriving, and she could already feel the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Maria had been stationed at this remote outpost in Afghanistan for 8 months now, serving as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne Division. At 26, she had already seen more combat than many soldiers twice her age. Her small frame and quiet demeanor often led newcomers to underestimate her, but those who had served alongside her knew better. She had saved more lives than she could count, pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles and treating traumatic injuries under enemy fire. The transport vehicle came to a stop near the main barracks, and a group of 6 soldiers climbed out, their fresh uniforms and uncertain expressions marking them as recent graduates from basic training. Among them was Private First Class Jake Morrison, a tall, muscular young man from Texas, who carried himself with the swagger that often came with being the star athlete back home. Jake was 22 years old and had enlisted after college, convinced that his football background and natural leadership abilities would make him a standout soldier. He had excelled in basic training, earning praise from his drill sergeants for his physical prowess and aggressive approach to combat exercises. Now, as he looked around the dusty, austere base, he felt ready to prove himself in real combat. Captain Rodriguez, the commanding officer, gathered the new arrivals for a briefing. The captain was a weathered veteran with graying temples and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too many deployments and too many difficult decisions. He stood before the group with his arms crossed, studying each face with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to quickly assess the strengths and weaknesses of his soldiers. "Welcome to FOB Whiskey," Captain Rodriguez began, his voice carrying across the small group. "You're now part of Alpha Company, and I want to make something very clear from the start. The enemy doesn't care about your test scores from basic training or how fast you could run the obstacle course. Out here, your survival and the survival of your teammates depends on following orders, staying alert, and working as a unit." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You'll be assigned to different squads based on your military occupational specialties. Private Morrison, you'll be with 3rd Squad. Staff Sergeant Santos here will be your medic." Jake glanced over at Maria, taking in her compact build and serious expression. She stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and couldn't weigh more than 130 pounds soaking wet. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes held a steady, professional gaze as she nodded to acknowledge the introduction. "Ma'am," Jake said with a slight nod, though something in his tone suggested he was merely being polite rather than genuinely respectful. Maria had heard that tone before from countless young soldiers who looked at her and saw only what they expected to see. A small woman who probably couldn't keep up with the demands of infantry operations. She had learned long ago not to waste energy on first impressions, knowing that actions spoke louder than appearances. Over the next few days, Jake began to integrate with his new squad while learning the routines and protocols of life at the forward operating base. The base itself was a collection of prefabricated buildings, concrete barriers, and defensive positions surrounded by razor wire and watchtowers. It housed approximately 200 soldiers and served as a staging area for patrols and operations throughout the region. 3rd Squad consisted of 8 soldiers, each with specific roles and responsibilities. Squad leader Staff Sergeant Williams was a calm, methodical leader who had been in the Army for 12 years. Corporal Davis served as the team leader for the 1st Fire Team, while Specialist Thompson handled communications. Private Chen was the squad's designated marksman, and Private Williams operated the squad automatic weapon. Rounding out the group were Private Rodriguez, who served as the rifleman and assistant gunner, and Maria, whose role as medic made her one of the most valuable members of any unit. During their first joint training exercise, Jake's attitude toward Maria became more apparent. The squad was practicing medical evacuation procedures, with each soldier taking turns as both casualty and rescuer. When it came time for Jake to practice carrying a wounded soldier to safety, Staff Sergeant Williams deliberately paired him with Maria to simulate evacuating the medic if she became injured. "You've got to be kidding me," Jake muttered under his breath as he looked at Maria lying on the ground playing the role of a wounded soldier. "If she gets hit, we're supposed to carry dead weight while taking fire?" The comment was quiet enough that Staff Sergeant Williams didn't hear it clearly, but Maria caught every word. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she remained in character, allowing Jake to demonstrate the proper carrying technique. As he hoisted her onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry, she could feel the tension in his movements, the way he handled her with barely concealed irritation. "Faster, Morrison," Williams called out. "The enemy isn't going to wait for you to get comfortable." Jake picked up the pace, but his movements remained stiff and mechanical. When he finally reached the designated safe zone and set Maria down, she looked up at him with calm, steady eyes. "Good technique," she said simply. "But in a real situation, remember that the person you're carrying might be conscious and in pain. Try to keep your movements as smooth as possible." Jake nodded curtly but said nothing, clearly unmoved by her feedback. As far as he was concerned, he had done exactly what was required, and that was enough. Word of Jake's deadweight comment spread through the tight-knit squad over the following days, though no one confronted him directly about it. In the military culture of the forward operating base, such attitudes weren't uncommon among new soldiers who hadn't yet experienced real combat. Many veterans had learned to let actions speak louder than words, knowing that deployment had a way of teaching harsh lessons about the value of every team member. Maria herself seemed unaffected by Jake's dismissive attitude. She continued to perform her duties with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown, checking on soldiers during sick call, maintaining her medical supplies, and participating in squad training exercises. She had seen enough young soldiers with inflated egos to know that arguing or trying to prove herself through words would be pointless. Time and experience would either teach Jake the reality of combat operations, or they would teach him nothing at all. During weapons training, Maria demonstrated her competency with both her sidearm and rifle, hitting targets with consistent accuracy despite her role as a medic. She participated in physical training sessions, keeping pace with soldiers much larger than herself, and often finishing exercises while others were still struggling. Yet Jake continued to view her through the lens of his preconceived notions, seeing her small stature and medical role as indicators of weakness rather than recognizing the strength and skill required to serve as a combat medic. The other members of 3rd Squad had varying reactions to Jake's attitude. Some of the more experienced soldiers, like Corporal Davis, simply watched and waited, knowing that deployment would eventually reveal everyone's true character. Others, particularly the younger soldiers, were influenced by Jake's confidence and physical presence, unconsciously beginning to adopt similar dismissive attitudes toward Maria. Private Chen, the squad's designated marksman, had worked closely with Maria during several previous operations and knew firsthand how crucial she was to their survival. During one conversation in the mess hall, he tried to give Jake some perspective. "You know, Santos has been here longer than almost anyone in the squad," Chen said carefully. "She's seen some serious action." Jake looked up from his meal, interested despite himself. "What kind of action?" "IED attacks, firefights, you name it. She pulled Corporal Jenkins out of a burning Humvee last month when his vehicle hit a roadside bomb, treated his burns under fire while the rest of us were still trying to figure out what happened." "That's what medics do," Jake replied with a shrug. "It's their job." Chen shook his head. "Man, you really don't get it, do you? When bullets are flying and people are screaming, doing your job isn't as easy as it sounds. Most people freeze up the first time they see real combat. Santos doesn't freeze." Despite Chen's efforts to provide context, Jake remained unconvinced. In his mind, Maria was still just a small woman playing at being a soldier, someone who would likely become a liability when the squad faced real danger. He had trained hard to be an infantry soldier, and he believed that physical strength and aggressive tactics were the most important qualities a soldier could possess. As the days passed, the squad settled into the routine of base life while preparing for their first patrol mission. Intelligence reports indicated increased insurgent activity in the surrounding area, and Alpha Company was tasked with conducting regular patrols to gather information and maintain a presence in the local villages. Maria spent her time reviewing medical protocols and ensuring that her aid bag was fully stocked with supplies. She carried more equipment than most soldiers realized, including advanced trauma supplies, medications, and specialized tools for treating battlefield injuries. Her total load often exceeded 40 pounds, not including her weapon, ammunition, and personal gear. Jake, meanwhile, focused on cleaning his rifle and reviewing tactical procedures with the other soldiers. He was eager to finally see combat, convinced that his training and natural abilities would make him a valuable asset to the squad. During conversations with other new arrivals, he often expressed frustration with what he saw as the overly cautious approach taken by the veteran soldiers. "These guys act like every patrol is going to be a major battle," Jake complained to another new soldier. "We've got superior training, superior equipment, and superior firepower. The insurgents are just a bunch of farmers with AK-47s. Such comments revealed Jake's fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of asymmetric warfare and the challenges faced by American forces in Afghanistan. The enemy might not have sophisticated equipment, but they possessed intimate knowledge of the local terrain, the support of portions of the local population, and the tactical advantage of choosing when and where to engage American forces. Staff Sergeant Williams, as the squad leader, was well aware of the dynamic developing within his unit. He had served multiple deployments and had seen how the stress of combat could either bring soldiers together or tear them apart. He made a mental note to keep a close eye on Jake during their upcoming patrol, knowing that the young soldier's attitude could potentially endanger the entire squad. The night before their first mission, Williams called the squad together for a final briefing. The soldiers gathered in a circle outside their barracks, the desert air beginning to cool as the sun set behind the mountains. Williams spread a map on the ground and used a red-filtered flashlight to illuminate their planned route. "Tomorrow we'll be conducting a presence patrol through villages Alpha through Delta," Williams explained, pointing to each location on the map. "Our mission is to gather intelligence, assess the security situation, and demonstrate coalition presence to the local population. We'll be mounted in 2 vehicles, with Santos riding in the lead vehicle with the first fire team." He looked around the circle. "I want everyone to remember that this isn't a training exercise. The enemy has been active in this area, and we need to stay alert at all times. Follow your battle drills, maintain proper spacing, and watch your sectors of fire." Maria listened intently to the briefing, visualizing the medical challenges she might face during the patrol. She mentally reviewed the locations of the nearest medical facilities and considered the evacuation procedures that would be needed if anyone was wounded. Her aid bag was already prepared, but she conducted one final inventory to ensure she had everything she might need. Jake felt a surge of excitement as he listened to the briefing. Finally, he would have the chance to prove himself in real combat. He checked his rifle one more time, ensuring that it was properly cleaned and loaded. His body armor was adjusted correctly, and his ammunition was readily accessible. He felt ready for whatever the enemy might throw at them. As the squad members dispersed to get some rest before the early morning departure, Jake found himself walking alongside Maria toward the barracks. For a moment he considered saying something to her, perhaps offering some words of encouragement or attempting to bridge the gap that had formed between them. But his pride and preconceived notions held him back, and he simply nodded politely before heading to his bunk. Maria watched him go, then spent a few more minutes studying the patrol route and considering the tactical situation they might encounter. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and something about the intelligence reports bothered her. The enemy activity in the area seemed too convenient, too obvious. It felt like the insurgents might be trying to draw American forces into a predetermined area for reasons that weren't yet clear. But those were concerns for the officers and intelligence specialists to worry about. Her job was to keep her soldiers alive and healthy, regardless of what challenges they might face. She said a brief prayer for the safety of her squad, then headed inside to get some sleep before what promised to be a very long day. The next morning would bring the squad face to face with the harsh realities of combat, testing not only their tactical skills, but also their ability to work together under pressure. For Jake, it would be his first real test as a soldier. For Maria, it would be another opportunity to prove that heroism comes in many forms, and that the smallest soldiers often carry the heaviest burdens. The pre-dawn darkness was broken only by the red glow of tactical lights as 3rd Squad prepared for their first patrol. Maria moved methodically through her equipment checks, testing her radio, verifying her medical supplies, and ensuring her weapon was clean and properly lubricated. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders, knowing that 8 lives might depend on her skills and preparation before the day was over. Jake emerged from the barracks carrying his gear with the confident stride of someone eager to finally see action. His rifle gleamed in the artificial light, meticulously cleaned and maintained according to regulations. His body armor was properly adjusted, and his ammunition pouches were arranged for quick access. Despite his dismissive attitude toward Maria, he had taken his preparation seriously, understanding that his own survival depended on being ready for combat. Staff Sergeant Williams conducted a final inspection of his soldiers, checking everything from ammunition loads to communication equipment. His experienced eye caught details that newer soldiers might miss: a loose strap that could rattle and give away their position, a magazine that wasn't properly seated, or equipment that might shift during movement and create noise. "Santos, you're riding in the lead vehicle with 1st Fire Team," Williams announced as he completed his inspection. "Morrison, you'll be in the trail vehicle with me and 2nd Fire Team. Remember your sectors of responsibility and maintain communication at all times." The 2 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, or MRAPs, sat ready in the motor pool, their thick armor plating and reinforced glass designed to withstand the roadside bombs that had become the signature weapon of insurgents throughout Afghanistan. Each vehicle carried a crew of 4 soldiers plus additional passengers, and their weight and size made them both a blessing and a curse on the narrow mountain roads they would traverse. Maria climbed into the lead vehicle and took her position behind the driver, her medical bag secured within easy reach. Private Chen, serving as the vehicle commander, settled into the front passenger seat, while Corporal Davis and Private Rodriguez completed the crew. The interior of the MRAP was cramped and hot, with limited visibility through the small bulletproof windows. Jake took his position in the trail vehicle, feeling the same mixture of excitement and nervousness that every soldier experiences before their first combat patrol. The reality of the situation was beginning to set in as he looked around at the serious faces of his squad mates. This wasn't a training exercise where mistakes could be corrected with additional instruction. Out here, mistakes could be fatal. The convoy departed FOB Whiskey just as the first hints of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon, the rumbling diesel engines echoing off the concrete barriers as they passed through the main gate. The base grew smaller in the distance as they navigated the winding dirt road that connected their outpost to the main supply route running through the valley. Afghanistan's landscape was both beautiful and threatening, with towering mountains on all sides creating natural corridors that could easily become killing fields for a well-positioned enemy. The morning air was crisp and clear, providing excellent visibility but also making the American vehicles easy to spot from the ridgelines above. Private Rodriguez, serving as the driver of the lead vehicle, navigated carefully around the potholes and debris that littered the road. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he scanned for any signs of disturbance that might indicate the presence of an improvised explosive device. Every pile of trash, every abandoned tire, and every patch of recently disturbed earth was a potential threat that required careful evaluation. Maria monitored the radio traffic while keeping watch through her assigned sector. Her earpiece crackled with periodic status reports from other units in the area, painting a picture of the broader tactical situation. Intelligence indicated that several insurgent cells were operating in the region, but their exact locations and intentions remained unknown. The first village on their route appeared ahead, a collection of mud brick buildings clustered around a small marketplace where local farmers brought their goods to trade. Children emerged from doorways to wave at the passing vehicles, while adults watched from a more cautious distance. Reading the mood of local populations was a crucial skill for American forces, as changes in behavior often provided early warning of potential threats. "First village looks normal," Chen reported over the radio. "Lots of civilians moving around, kids playing in the streets. No obvious signs of trouble." Williams acknowledged the report from the trail vehicle while maintaining his own observation of the surrounding area. His experience told him that appearances could be deceiving, and that insurgents often used the presence of civilians as both camouflage and protection from American forces, who were bound by strict rules of engagement designed to minimize harm to innocent people. The patrol continued through the village without incident, though Maria noticed that fewer adults made eye contact with the passing vehicles than usual. It was a subtle change, but one that experienced soldiers learned to recognize as potentially significant. Fear, whether of the Americans or of insurgents who might punish cooperation, could drastically alter the behavior of local populations. Jake watched the village pass by through the thick windows of his MRAP, trying to process the complex reality of counterinsurgency operations. The people here weren't obviously hostile, but they weren't particularly friendly either. They seemed to view the American soldiers with a mixture of caution, resignation, and calculation that spoke to the complicated nature of the conflict. The second village presented a different atmosphere entirely. The streets were noticeably emptier, with only a few elderly men visible near the central mosque. No children ran out to wave, and the few women who could be seen quickly disappeared behind doors and walls when the vehicles approached. The absence of normal activity was immediately apparent to the experienced soldiers in the patrol. "This doesn't feel right," Davis muttered from his position in the lead vehicle. "Where is everybody?" Maria keyed her radio to pass the observation back to Williams. "Trail vehicle. Be advised that Second Village is showing minimal civilian activity. Very few people visible, and those we can see appear to be avoiding contact." "Copy that," Williams responded. "All vehicles maintain heightened alert status. Watch for signs of IEDs or ambush positions." The convoy slowed as it passed through the deserted village. Every soldier now focused intently on their assigned sectors. Gun trucks positioned their weapons to cover potential threat areas, while drivers carefully avoided any debris or obstacles that might conceal explosives. The tension inside both vehicles was palpable, as professional soldiers relied on their training to manage the stress of potential combat. Jake felt his heart rate increase as the reality of the situation became clear. This wasn't the straightforward combat scenario he had envisioned during training. The enemy wasn't visible, the threat was ambiguous, and the rules of engagement prevented them from taking action based solely on suspicion. The uncertainty was far more stressful than he had anticipated. As they cleared the second village and began climbing the road toward the third checkpoint, Maria reviewed her medical procedures one more time. She mentally rehearsed the steps for treating gunshot wounds, blast injuries, and traumatic amputations, knowing that the golden hour for treating severe trauma could mean the difference between life and death for any soldier who might be wounded. The road began to climb more steeply as it wound through a narrow canyon with high walls on both sides. This type of terrain was particularly dangerous for vehicle patrols, as it limited options for evasion and provided numerous positions from which insurgents could initiate attacks. The lead vehicle's pace slowed even further as Rodriguez navigated the increasingly difficult route. Williams studied the terrain ahead through his binoculars, noting several locations that would provide excellent firing positions for enemy forces. The intelligence briefing had mentioned increased insurgent activity in this area, but there had been no specific threat warnings for this particular route. Still, his instincts told him to remain vigilant. "All stations were entering the canyon section of our route," Williams announced over the radio. "Maintain visual contact with adjacent vehicles and be prepared to execute immediate action drills if necessary." Immediate action drills were rehearsed responses to common combat situations, designed to give soldiers automatic reactions that could save lives when there wasn't time for detailed planning. Every member of the squad had practiced these drills countless times, but Jake was about to discover the difference between training scenarios and real combat. The attack began without warning as the lead vehicle rounded a sharp curve in the canyon road. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked down from the ridgeline above, striking the road just behind the MRAP and sending a shower of dirt and debris over the armored vehicle. The explosion was immediately followed by the distinctive crack of AK-47 rifle fire from multiple positions along both sides of the canyon. "Contact! Contact!" RPG and small arms fire from multiple positions. Chen shouted into his radio as he attempted to locate the enemy firing positions. The training had taken over, but his voice carried the strain of a soldier experiencing his first real firefight. Rodriguez instinctively floored the accelerator, attempting to drive through the kill zone as trained, but a second RPG impact directly in front of the vehicle forced him to brake hard to avoid driving over a crater that could disable their MRAP. The vehicle was now stopped in the middle of the ambush, exactly where the insurgents wanted it. Maria felt the world slow down as her training kicked in. The sounds of gunfire and explosions seemed muted, and her vision narrowed to focus on immediate threats and priorities. She could hear bullets striking the armored hull of their vehicle, producing metallic pings that reminded her just how thin the line was between life and death. "Driver, can you move?" Davis shouted over the noise of the engagement. "Negative. Roads blocked ahead and behind," Rodriguez responded, his voice tight with stress. The trail vehicle had stopped approximately 50 meters behind them, unable to advance due to the blocked road but also unable to retreat without leaving the lead vehicle exposed. Williams made the tactical decision to dismount his soldiers and establish a defensive position while attempting to coordinate with the lead vehicle. All stations were dismounting to establish overwatch positions, Williams announced. Lead vehicle, can you get your people out safely? Inside the lead vehicle, Davis made a quick assessment of their situation. Enemy fire was coming from elevated positions on both sides of the canyon, making it dangerous to exit the vehicle, but potentially fatal to remain trapped inside if the insurgents had additional RPGs or other heavy weapons. We need to get out and find cover, Davis decided. Santos, you stay with the vehicle until we can establish a secure position for you. Negative, Maria replied firmly. If we're taking casualties, you need me mobile and ready to treat wounded. I go where the squad goes. It was exactly the kind of situation where Jake's earlier comments about dead weight would be put to the test. As the soldiers prepared to exit their vehicles under fire, every member of the squad would need to contribute to their survival and the success of their mission. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site carefully, using the natural terrain to their advantage while creating multiple dilemmas for the American forces. The narrow canyon prevented the MRAPs from maneuvering effectively, while the elevated firing positions made it difficult for the soldiers to return accurate fire once they dismounted. Jake felt a surge of panic as the reality of combat hit him. This was nothing like the controlled environments of training exercises, where threats were clearly marked and outcomes were predictable. Here, bullets were flying from multiple directions, explosions were going off randomly, and confusion reigned supreme. His carefully rehearsed plans and confident expectations crumbled in the face of genuine chaos. Morrison, get ready to move, Williams shouted as he prepared to exit the trail vehicle. We need to establish covering fire for the lead element. The next few minutes would test every aspect of the squad's training, cohesion, and individual character. For Maria, it would be another opportunity to demonstrate the courage and skill that made her invaluable to her unit. For Jake, it would be a harsh introduction to the realities of combat and the importance of every soldier in the fight for survival. As enemy fire continued to pour down from the surrounding ridges, both vehicles prepared to execute the immediate action drills they had practiced so many times. But practice, as they were about to discover, was a poor substitute for the real thing. The mountains of Afghanistan were about to teach them lessons that no training scenario could adequately prepare them for. Lessons written in blood and earned through the kind of courage that can only be tested under fire. The cacophony of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls as Staff Sergeant Williams made the critical decision to dismount his soldiers from the trapped vehicles. The ambush had been expertly planned, with insurgent fighters positioned on both sides of the narrow passage, to create overlapping fields of fire that would make movement extremely dangerous for the American forces. All stations, we're going to bound forward by fire teams, Williams announced over the radio, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Second fire team will provide covering fire while first fire team moves to that cluster of rocks on the left side. Then we'll leapfrog forward until we can get to better cover. Maria checked her medical bag one final time as she prepared to exit the lead vehicle. Her training had taught her to expect casualties in this type of engagement, and she mentally reviewed the triage procedures that would help her prioritize treatment if multiple soldiers were wounded simultaneously. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders as she realized that every member of the squad might depend on her skills in the next few minutes. Jake felt his mouth go dry as he watched Williams and the other experienced soldiers prepare for what was clearly going to be a dangerous tactical movement. The confident swagger he had displayed back at the base seemed like a distant memory, as the reality of combat stripped away all pretense and forced him to confront his own mortality. Morrison, you're with me, Williams called out. When we move, you stay low and follow my exact path. Don't bunch up with other soldiers, and don't stop moving until we reach cover. The first soldiers to exit the vehicles immediately came under intense fire from the insurgent positions. Bullets struck the ground around them, sending up small clouds of dust and debris that marked near misses. The distinctive crack of rifle rounds passing overhead created a deadly symphony that every combat soldier learned to recognize and fear. Corporal Davis led First Fire Team in a crouching run toward the rock formation on the left side of the canyon, while the soldiers remaining in the vehicles provided covering fire with their mounted weapons. The disciplined volleys of return fire forced the insurgents to keep their heads down momentarily, creating brief windows of opportunity for movement. Maria emerged from the lead vehicle during one of these windows, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as she sprinted toward the same rock formation. Her small stature actually worked to her advantage in this situation, as she presented a smaller target for the enemy fighters positioned above them. Years of physical training and combat experience allowed her to move quickly and efficiently despite the heavy load of medical equipment she carried. Jake followed Williams out of the trail vehicle, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the sounds of gunfire. The theoretical knowledge from his training seemed inadequate as he tried to process the sensory overload of his first firefight. The smell of gunpowder, the sound of bullets cracking overhead, and the sight of muzzle flashes from enemy positions created an overwhelming assault on his senses. "Stay with me, Morrison!" Williams shouted as they bounded forward toward the rock formation where First Fire Team had taken cover. "Keep your head down and watch where you're stepping." The insurgents had positioned themselves well, with firing positions that provided good cover while offering clear fields of fire down into the canyon. Their weapons included not only AK-47 assault rifles, but also at least one machine gun that sent long bursts of automatic fire sweeping across the road where the American vehicles sat disabled. Private Chen, serving as the designated marksman, had managed to identify one of the enemy firing positions and was engaging it with precise aimed shots from his scoped rifle. His training and natural shooting ability allowed him to place accurate fire even under the stress of combat, forcing one of the insurgent fighters to abandon his position and seek better cover. "I've got movement on the right side ridgeline," Chen reported over the radio. "Looks like they're trying to flank us from that direction." The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex as the insurgents attempted to maneuver into positions that would allow them to attack the American forces from multiple directions simultaneously. Williams realized that his squad needed to break out of the kill zone quickly before the enemy could complete their flanking movement. "Santos, how many casualties do we have?" Williams called out as he assessed their options. "No casualties yet, but Private Rodriguez took some shrapnel in the leg from that first RPG. Maria responded while applying a pressure bandage to Rodriguez's wound behind the cover of the rocks. "He can still move, but he's going to need proper medical attention once we get out of here." The wounded soldier gritted his teeth against the pain but remained focused on providing security for his position. The injury wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a stark reminder of how quickly the situation could deteriorate if they didn't act decisively. Jake crouched behind the rocks, trying to identify targets among the enemy positions while struggling to control his breathing. The adrenaline coursing through his system made it difficult to aim steadily, and he found himself firing more rapidly than his training had taught him, wasting ammunition without achieving effective results. "Morrison, slow down your rate of fire," Williams instructed. "Pick your targets carefully and make every shot count. We don't have unlimited ammunition out here." The lesson was one that every combat soldier had to learn, that the chaos and stress of battle could quickly lead to poor decision-making if discipline and training weren't maintained. Jake forced himself to slow down, taking deliberate aim at muzzle flashes and suspected enemy positions rather than simply firing in the general direction of the threat. Maria moved between the scattered soldiers, checking for injuries and distributing ammunition from her medical bag where soldiers were running low. Her calm demeanor under fire had a steadying effect on the younger soldiers, who drew confidence from her professional competence even as bullets continued to snap overhead. "We need to get moving before they complete that flanking movement," Williams decided. "First Fire Team, can you see a route up the left side of the canyon?" Davis studied the terrain through his binoculars, looking for a path that would allow them to climb out of the kill zone while maintaining some cover from enemy observation. The canyon walls were steep, but not impossible to climb, and there appeared to be a series of ledges and rock formations that could provide concealment during movement. "I think we can make it up that draw on the left," Davis reported. "It's going to be slow going with full gear, but it beats staying here and letting them surround us." The decision to attempt a breakout up the canyon wall was risky, but remaining in their current position was becoming increasingly untenable as the insurgents continued to improve their tactical situation. Williams made the call to begin the movement, knowing that speed and aggressive action were often the best responses to an ambush. "All stations, we're going to climb out on the left side," Williams announced. "Move in bounds by fire teams, maintain security at all times, and watch for enemy movement on the flanks." The climb began with First Fire Team leading the way up the steep slope, while Second Fire Team provided covering fire from below. The physical demands of the ascent combined with the weight of full combat gear and the stress of enemy contact, quickly began to take their toll on the soldiers. Maria found herself in the middle of the formation, ready to treat any casualties that might occur during the movement, while also carrying her own weapon and gear up the difficult terrain. Her years of physical training served her well as she navigated the rocky slope without losing her footing or falling behind the pace set by the other soldiers. Jake struggled more than he had expected with the physical demands of the climb. His football training had prepared him for straight-line speed and power, but the endurance required for sustained movement up steep terrain while carrying heavy gear was different from anything he had experienced. His breathing became labored, and he began to fall behind the rest of the squad. "Morrison, keep up!" Williams called back. "We can't afford to get strung out during this movement." The encouragement helped Jake find a second wind, and he forced himself to maintain pace with the other soldiers, despite the burning in his lungs and legs. The reality of combat was proving to be far more physically demanding than he had anticipated, requiring not just strength but also endurance, mental toughness, and the ability to function effectively under extreme stress. As the squad climbed higher up the canyon wall, they began to gain a tactical advantage over the insurgent positions. The elevated position allowed them to observe enemy movement more clearly, while making it more difficult for the insurgents to maintain accurate fire on the American forces. Chen spotted an opportunity to engage one of the machine gun positions that had been causing the most problems for their movement. Setting up his rifle on a stable rest, he carefully aimed at the enemy position and squeezed off a precise shot that silenced the automatic weapon. "Machine gun position neutralized," Chen reported with satisfaction. The loss of their heavy weapons seemed to demoralize the insurgent fighters, who began to withdraw from some of their forward positions. The tide of the engagement was beginning to turn in favor of the American forces, but Williams knew that the enemy could still cause significant casualties if his soldiers became careless or overconfident. "Maintain discipline and watch your sectors," Williams reminded his soldiers. "These guys might be pulling back to set up another ambush further along our route." As they reached a more defensible position partway up the canyon wall, Williams called for a brief halt to assess their situation and treat Rodriguez's wound more thoroughly. The temporary pause also gave the soldiers a chance to drink water, redistribute ammunition, and prepare for the next phase of their movement. Maria took advantage of the break to conduct a more detailed examination of Rodriguez's leg wound. The shrapnel had caused muscle damage but had missed any major blood vessels or bones. She applied a more substantial dressing and gave him pain medication that would help him continue moving without compromising his ability to fight if necessary. "You're going to be fine," she assured Rodriguez as she finished treating his injury. "Just try to favor that leg when you can and let me know immediately if the pain gets worse." Jake watched Maria work, seeing for the first time the professional competence and calm courage that made her such a valuable member of the squad. Her small hands moved efficiently as she cleaned the wound and applied the dressing, her voice remaining steady and reassuring even as sporadic enemy fire continued to echo through the canyon below. For the first time since arriving at the forward operating base, Jake began to question his earlier assessment of Maria's capabilities. The woman treating Rodriguez with such skill and composure was clearly not the dead weight he had imagined her to be. Combat was teaching him lessons about courage and competence that his previous experiences had never provided. The squad prepared to continue their movement up the canyon wall, knowing that they still had to reach a position where they could call for helicopter extraction or link up with additional friendly forces. The ambush had been survived, but they weren't safe yet. The mountains of Afghanistan still held many dangers, and the day was far from over. The squad had been climbing for nearly an hour when they finally reached a plateau that offered both defensive positions and clear lines of communication back to their base. The insurgent fire had gradually diminished as the American forces gained the high ground, forcing the enemy fighters to withdraw to avoid being outflanked by the soldiers above them. Staff Sergeant Williams immediately established a defensive perimeter while attempting to re-establish radio contact with forward operating base Whiskey. The thick canyon walls had interfered with their communications during the firefight, leaving the base unaware of their current situation and location. "FOB Whiskey, this is Alpha 3-6, Williams called into his radio. "We've been engaged by enemy forces in Grid Square Papa Tango 4-7-9-2. We have one minor casualty and are currently in a defensible position approximately 500 meters above the canyon floor." The response crackled back through the static. Alpha 3-6, roger your transmission. Be advised that helicopter support is en route to your location. Estimated time of arrival is 30 minutes. Can you maintain your current position until extraction? Affirmative, Williams replied. We can hold here, but be advised that enemy forces may still be in the area. Maria used the temporary respite to conduct a more thorough medical assessment of all squad members. The stress and physical demands of combat often masked injuries that might not become apparent until the immediate danger had passed. She checked each soldier for signs of shock, dehydration, or wounds that might have gone unnoticed during the intensity of the firefight. Jake sat on a rock outcropping, his rifle across his knees as he tried to process what had just happened to him. The confident young soldier who had arrived at the base just days earlier felt like a different person entirely. The reality of combat had stripped away his illusions about warfare and forced him to confront the gap between his expectations and the harsh truth of military operations in Afghanistan. You did good out there, Morrison, Corporal Davis said as he checked the ammunition in his magazines. First firefight is always the hardest. It gets easier once you know what to expect. Jake nodded but remained quiet, still struggling with the flood of emotions and adrenaline that followed his first combat experience. He found his eyes drawn repeatedly to Maria as she moved among the soldiers, her calm professionalism, a stark contrast to his own inner turmoil. Private Chen was scanning the terrain below them through his rifle scope, watching for any signs of enemy movement that might indicate another attack was being planned. His experience as a designated marksman had made him skilled at reading terrain and identifying potential threats before they could develop into immediate dangers. I'm not seeing any movement down there, Chen reported. Looks like they decided to break contact rather than try to fight us from a disadvantaged position. The tactical situation had stabilized, but Williams remained vigilant. Insurgent fighters in Afghanistan were known for their patience and ability to wait for opportunities to strike when American forces least expected it. The fact that the immediate threat had passed didn't mean they were completely safe. As the soldiers waited for their helicopter extraction, the conversation gradually turned to the engagement they had just survived. Each soldier processed the experience differently, some with nervous humor, others with quiet reflection on how close they had come to serious injury or death. That first RPG came so close I could feel the heat from the explosion, Rodriguez commented as he adjusted the bandage on his wounded leg. If we hadn't been in those MRAPs, we'd probably all be casualties right now. The observation reminded everyone of how much their survival had depended on factors beyond their individual skill or courage. The armor protection of their vehicles, the quality of their equipment, and the tactical decisions made by their leaders had all played crucial roles in getting them through the ambush. Maria was checking her medical supplies and considering what she would need to restock once they returned to base when she noticed Jake watching her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. There was something different in his eyes, a new understanding that suggested his attitude toward her had begun to change. Santos, Jake called out hesitantly. I wanted to say what you did back there, treating Rodriguez under fire like that. That took real courage. It was the first time Jake had addressed her with genuine respect, and Maria could hear the sincerity in his voice. She nodded in acknowledgement but didn't make a big deal of the comment, understanding that combat had a way of teaching soldiers lessons that couldn't be learned any other way. We all did our jobs, she replied simply. That's what being part of a squad means. The sound of approaching helicopters began to echo off the canyon walls as their extraction arrived on schedule. 2 Black Hawks appeared over the ridgeline, their pilots carefully assessing the landing zone while door gunners scanned for potential threats in the surrounding area. Williams guided the helicopters to a suitable landing area using colored smoke and radio communications while the squad prepared to move to the extraction point. The sight of the aircraft was a welcome relief for soldiers who had spent the last several hours in enemy territory with limited support. All stations prepare for extraction, Williams announced. We'll move to the LZ in 2 groups, with first fire team going on the lead bird and second fire team following on the trail aircraft. As the squad began moving toward the landing zone, Jake suddenly stumbled and fell to one knee. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the firefight was wearing off, and the physical and emotional stress of combat was beginning to take its toll on his system. Morrison, you okay? Williams called out, concern evident in his voice. Jake tried to stand but found that his legs were shaking uncontrollably. His breathing had become rapid and shallow, and he felt dizzy despite the cool mountain air. The delayed stress reaction that sometimes affected soldiers after their first combat experience was hitting him with full force. I don't know what's wrong, Jake managed to say as he struggled to remain upright. Everything's spinning. Maria immediately recognized the symptoms of acute stress reaction and moved quickly to Jake's side. She guided him to sit down on a nearby rock while she assessed his condition, her medical training taking over as she began to address both the physical and psychological aspects of his distress. Take slow, deep breaths, she instructed calmly. You're having a normal reaction to combat stress. It's going to pass, but I need you to focus on controlling your breathing. Jake looked up at her with confusion and embarrassment evident in his eyes. The woman he had dismissed as dead weight was now the one helping him through the most vulnerable moment of his military career. The irony wasn't lost on him even in his current state. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the approaching helicopters. I'm sorry for what I said about you. You're not. I was wrong. Maria placed a steady hand on his shoulder as she continued to monitor his breathing and pulse. Her expression remained professional and compassionate, showing no trace of anger or vindictiveness, despite the dismissive treatment she had received from Jake. Combat affects everyone differently, she explained as she checked his pupils for signs of shock. There's no shame in having a stress reaction. Even the most experienced soldiers go through this sometimes. The first helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust and debris, its rotors creating a windstorm that forced the soldiers to shield their eyes. Williams made the decision to modify the extraction plan, ensuring that Maria would accompany Jake on the same aircraft so she could continue monitoring his condition during the flight back to base. Santos, you go with Morrison on the first bird, Williams decided. Keep an eye on him during the flight. Davis, take your team on the second helicopter. As Maria helped Jake move toward the waiting aircraft, he felt a profound sense of shame mixed with newfound respect for the small woman supporting him. His entire worldview about strength, courage, and military capability had been fundamentally altered by the events of the last few hours. I called you dead weight, Jake said as they approached the helicopter, his voice breaking with emotion. But you're the strongest person here. You saved Rodriguez's life, and now you're saving mine. Maria helped him into the helicopter and secured his safety harness before taking her own seat beside him. The aircraft lifted off immediately, beginning the short flight back to Forward Operating Base Whiskey, where Jake could receive proper evaluation and treatment. During the flight, Maria continued to monitor Jake's vital signs while also conducting a mental review of the day's events. The ambush had been their squad's first major engagement, and overall they had performed well under difficult circumstances. Rodriguez's wound was minor, and everyone had made it out of the kill zone safely. Jake spent the flight staring out the window at the rugged Afghan landscape passing below them, his mind replaying the events of the ambush and his own reactions to combat. The confident young soldier who had arrived at the base with such high expectations about his own capabilities had been humbled by the reality of warfare. Will this get easier? Jake asked Maria as the base came into view ahead of them. The fear never goes away completely, she replied honestly, but you learn to function with it. You learn to trust your training and your squad mates. And you learn that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing your job even when you are afraid. The helicopter settled onto the landing pad at Fob Whiskey, and medical personnel were waiting to escort Jake to the aid station for evaluation. His stress reaction was already beginning to subside as his body's chemistry gradually returned to normal, but he would need time to process the psychological impact of his first combat experience. As they walked across the dusty compound toward the medical facility, Jake turned to Maria with an expression of genuine humility that she had never seen from him before. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly, for treating me with respect even after the way I acted, for taking care of me when I needed help, for showing me what real strength looks like. Maria smiled slightly as they reached the aid station where other medical personnel took over Jake's care. We're all part of the same team, she reminded him. We take care of each other, regardless of our differences. In the days that followed, Jake's attitude toward Maria and his understanding of military service underwent a complete transformation. He sought out opportunities to learn from her experience, asking questions about combat medicine and observing how she interacted with other soldiers in the unit. The young man who had once dismissed her as dead weight became one of her strongest advocates, speaking out whenever other new soldiers made similar comments about female service members or smaller soldiers. His first-hand experience of Maria's courage and competence under fire had taught him lessons that couldn't be learned from textbooks or training exercises. Maria, for her part, treated Jake's transformation with the same quiet professionalism she brought to all aspects of her service. She neither dwelt on his past comments nor made him feel worse about his initial attitude. Instead, she focused on helping him develop into a better soldier and a more mature person. The ambush in the canyon became a defining moment for 3rd Squad, forging bonds between the soldiers that would sustain them through the remainder of their deployment. They had faced enemy fire together, overcome a dangerous tactical situation, and learned to rely on each other regardless of their individual backgrounds or preconceived notions. For Jake, the experience marked the beginning of his real education as a soldier. He learned that strength came in many forms, that courage could be found in unexpected places, and that the smallest person in a unit could often be the one who made the biggest difference when it mattered most. And in the mountains of Afghanistan, where life and death often hung in the balance, those lessons would prove to be more valuable than any amount of physical strength or athletic ability he had brought with him from his previous life.